should we be worried about Switch 2's image quality / performance long term, since we are already seeing games rendering at 360p? Oliver?
Short answer is yes, I would be, but there are some caveats, right? So the game you're referring to, Fast Fusion, it presents a lot of problems for upscalers, and for obvious reasons. And I think that slower games that operate even within similar resolution bounds and still using DLSS, like Hogwarts Legacy is one example, they often look a fair bit better. They can look a fair bit better. And I think in general, PS4 class software probably also does not need crazy upscale ratios to look good and to work well in good performance on the Switch 2. So I wouldn't be too worried about it for a lot of titles that are going to come to Switch 2, which are kind of in this PS4 class in terms of visual technology, in terms of hardware load, in terms of ability to scale to the hardware. But I would think that for really demanding AAA ports with like virtualized geometry, with RTGI, with all these systems that developers might attempt to bring to Switch 2, like we're seeing with the upcoming Star Wars Outlaws, just as one example of, I'm sure, very, very many games to come that do use those kinds of systems. Those games will have to cut res hard, in addition to a myriad of other changes that include cuts to all kinds of settings and potentially really big cuts to all kinds of settings there as well. But I do think that if those games are sufficiently slow-paced, even with kind of this DLSS abuse, they can cover up that image breakup with motion blur maybe, and if the game is a little bit slower-paced, at least from the results that I'm seeing in Hogwarts Legacy, maybe that could actually be okay. And maybe the fact that the Switch 2's quote-unquote DLSS Lite is so good at just resolving a crisp, clean, stable image when the camera's at rest, maybe that kind of makes up for some of these flaws in motion, potentially, right? So I think with those titles, the more important thing is just getting them at a reasonable level of performance in the hardware, and then image quality will be kind of a secondary concern, and you'll be lucky to have like decent image quality. So yeah, I would be concerned, but I think those kinds of games, you always have to accept some degree of compromise there.
Right, okay. John, I think in your Fast Fusion review, you might have coined the phrase DLSS abuse.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of interested in your response to this question.
I mean, there's always this is something that's not really gonna change, and people ultimately abuse the Switch 1 as well with some insanely low resolutions on there.
Yeah.
We're gonna see the same here, I think, just as usual. I just think that essentially shifted the needle a bit higher, and like 360p on the Switch 2 with DLSS is going to look better than 360p upscaled by the Switch 1, for instance, right? So even if we're talking low pixel counts like that, you'll still get better results in the newer hardware. I think by and large, though, I'm not too worried about it. I mean, I don't expect world-class image quality across the board on Switch 2 games, but I do think it's still going to be a marked improvement over where Switch 1 was, which is to say Switch 1 was often still very much in like PS3 era image quality by and large, right?
Especially like all those like UE4 kind of AA mid-budget games coming over at like, 400p with that really blurry Unreal TAA and all the settings cut out, and it just there's so many games like that came over to the system, and you look at them and you wanted to cry. And then of course 30 FPS with uneven frame pacing, and I hope we see a lot less of that, if any of that at all, on Switch 2.